Welcome back. In this session, we're going to be mapping from a flat file to an X12 file using Altova MapForce. I'll go over how you can deal with connecting those elements and mapping from something like a flat CSV file to an X12 856. So let's jump straight in and see how we'll go about doing this. Before we start mapping our data, I just want to add that I will look to create a separate video where I'll actually explore the X12 format. So we can dive into that in a separate video. For this practical example, I'll assume you understand the formats we are going to be using, and here we're going to focus entirely on the practical mapping using Altova MapForce. So firstly, I'm going to bring on screen our format for the input. So the input, as discussed, is a CSV. So this is the CSV format we're going to be receiving as the input. Here we've got a clear indicator of the type of record. We then have the key for this particular message. So this will be the ASN number. And then we've got the various different elements around the data that we're collecting at each particular level. So I'll go over these briefly, and then I've got a separate CSV where we're looking at this from a spec perspective. So we've been given this example ASN input. Here we have a header record with the ASN, and then we've got the created and the ship date. So it's as simple as that on this side. We then have things like the references that relate to this ASN. We then have NAD records. So these are name and address records for the carrier, ship to, ship from, supplier, and so forth. Then within this, we then have our orders. So we have two orders in this ASN, which relate to two different purchase order references. Within an order, we then have containers, which is represented by our CONs. And then a container can have or will have a unique reference and a type. So here we've got a pallet referenced 1, we've got length, width, and height, and then we've also got the PO that transpires to, the order. Inside that pallet, we then have two containers. Again, these are identified by cart 01 and cart 02. And within these containers, we then have the elements or the actual articles that are stored within them. So for this order and this purchase order here, we have pallet 1, which contains two cartons, carton 1 and 2, which weigh 45.1 kilos and 25.4 kilos. And they contain, firstly, the first carton, carton 1, contains this EAN, and it's 15 of those. So the unit measure here are eaches. Carton 2, we then have this EAN, and again, 3 eaches. Okay. We have the next pallet, so we've got pallet 2, and that pallet then contains a single carton, which contains this EAN, get my words out, and again it's 15 eaches. So order 1 contains 2 pallets, pallet 1 contains 2 cartons, and then pallet 2 contains 1 carton. Obviously each carton has the line information stored within it. Then our second purchase order is 1 pallet and 1 carton, with 15 of this particular item within it. So again, quite a straightforward CSV, and this is the basic structure to it. I've then put together an ASN spec, which describes basically the headings for each of these types of records. So our reference will then have our ASN reference being the second column in each, as we've seen in the original here. And then we've got the reference code, the reference value, name and address, quite straightforward. Ord, again, the PO reference for that particular order. And then you've got container and lines. And obviously the container has a container type. So you'd expect there to be pallet and then parcel or carton and then the item within it and so forth. So we've got an example here that's multi-level, multi-facet, and is reasonably complex. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this CSV ASN and we're going to convert this into an X12 856 ASN. So that's what we're going to be doing during this session. So let's do that now and start setting up this particular map. So firstly, we're going to want to set up our inputs. So our input file, and we can specify a value for that particular input file. So I've got this particular file on disk, and I'm just taking this from another previous map, so we've got that there for reference. So we've got our input file here. We then need to be able to drop this CSV into our mapping so we can have that file there. So I'm going to grab that off screen and just drop this example in here. Straight away, this gives us a nice view here, and it creates us the various different fields we're going to need in order to do our mapping. And they're all string fields, so I'm happy with that. So we can bring this over, and we can then set this up as dynamic and link this up here. So that's our input. Then we need to do our output. So in order, again, to do that, we need to insert our output. Insert on here another input, which is going to be our output file. And again, here we can specify a location. And again, I've got that location on screen, so I'm just going to grab this. And we're just going to chuck that down here. We've got an out directory just to drop that file to, and we'll look at building up a file name as well. So now we've got that, we can then go to insert, and we want to insert now an EDI structure. In this case, it's the X12 4010, and we're looking for the 856. So there we go. 856 here, shipment notice or manifest. We're going to hit OK to this. It then asks for a potential example. We're not worried about that. We're just going to hit skip. And there we go. We've got that on here. And again, we can then link this up. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to set this output up already so that we've got something that actually makes sense. So in order to do that, I'm going to grab something off screen. Again, there's quite a lot that we're going to be doing during this session. So I've got some bits on another screen just to speed things up. But again, I'm going to make this fairly clear on what we're doing here and what we're setting up. So let me move this out of the way here. Right, so I've got to concatenate here. So what we're doing is we're going to take the output directory. Let's make this output directory because it's not a file that we're providing. We're going to provide the output directory here. We're then going to take distinct from field 2. And again, that is our ASN ID, which is going to be unique and the same for each value in there. And then we're taking the current time or date time and then turning that into a string. And we're using that to basically construct a string for our file name. So our file name is going to contain the ASN reference in here. So in this example, ASN 123456 underscore the current date time. And then we're going to have our .x12 extension there. So this gets our file name set up, and I'm just going to chuck this up the top just to get this out the way over here. And again, we're going to give ourselves a little bit of room here because, again, this map is actually quite complex because of how we're going to be looping and dealing with the fact that we've got this text file here that is very flat. Okay, so that sets up our structure now for our mapping and for us to start going ahead and mapping the various elements. Just going to save that, so we've got that here. We've got an error because we've not output, we've not connected anything. That's fine. So firstly, we need to start looking at the ISA. The ISA is all around the interchange, so here we'll need to really be able to get the header level information from our CSV here, so this level here. And we'll also need to look at grabbing some of the NAD, so the NAD, name and address elements there as well, to look at the sender and the receiver. So something else we'll also be looking to grab as well is references. So what we're going to do, and the best way I've found of achieving this, and there's multiple ways of achieving things in MapForce, is to create some variables, some XML structure in order to be able to populate this information so you don't have to filter so much on here. And also, the fact is with a flat file is you can't really name these fields in a way that describes the multiple purposes you've got for each one of these. So the thing that becomes difficult here is you've got this NAD one here. This is going to be the name of a carrier, but then equally it's the pallet reference, it's the EAN, and so forth. So we're going to create some structures to make this a little bit more visible and easier to understand and consume. So firstly, we want to look at a header. So with MapForce, if you drop XML data directly into the palette here, it will then enable you to create schemas off the back of that. So what I've been able to do is do that in order to create some schemas. So on here, we've got a schema for, if I skip this, for the header. So again, the header information that we're really keen on here is the ASN, the created, the shipped, and the interchange ID if we need that. So we've got an interchange ID here, 000026. So that's fine. So we want to be able to link that up. So we can start constructing and doing that now. So in order to do that, we will need to insert a filter. So on here, we've got this filter. We can then filter from the rows. And we're going to filter from the rows where we've got equal to HDR. So we're going to take this field here. We're going to set a constant, and this is going to be HDR. And that will give us our header record. So on true, we can then map that to here. And then we can grab our field 2, which is our ASN ID, field 3, which is our our created, 4 is the shipped, and 5 is the interchange ID. So again, interchange ID and so forth. That then creates this nice, useful structure for us here. I'm going to make this smaller because we're going to have quite a lot going on screen at the moment. And one mistake I've actually just noticed I've made here is I've dropped it as an output. I don't want it as an output. I want it as a variable. So I'm going to go into structures here, complex structures, hit choose. I want XML, and I want to use this particular structure here. So I can then hit OK, and we now get this as a variable. Because again, I'm not outputting this. I don't want this information available on output because I want to use it as part of the map. So I can just drag this down here, and it should then enable me to link everything up. So I can now delete that. So we've now got our variable that's holding our header information here. So let me just move this up here. Try and clean up as we go. So now from this, I can start mapping over to the other side. So I'm going to move this closer, but the likelihood is I'm going to need to move this out the way a little bit more to give us some more space. So for every HDR record, we're only going to have the one. So this is going to be creating our interchange. We're not worried about the settings. We're just going to take the default settings for X12. And then we need to start setting the various values for the ISA. So there are going to be some fixed values in here. So for instance, we've got 00. We're going to set that up on here, the authorization qualifier, and also on the security information qualifier. Now in this case, we actually need to look at things like the interchange sender and the interchange receiver. Now these aren't part of the header. These are actually name and address records. So again, like we have with the header, we need to now set up a name and address structure. So I've already done this. So if I go to insert and variable, we're now going to insert a name and address XML schema. So under my schemas, I've got a NAD schema. I'm then going to insert that. And we now have a name and address schema here. So we've got a variable where we can store a name and address. So here what we want to then do is we're going to do the same sort of filtering that we did for the header but we're going to be doing this in order to gain our name and address. So again, we're going to take this node. We're not interested in HDR here. We're actually interested in NAD. However, we also need to look for just the NAD record that we're interested in. So here we've got things like the carrier, ship to, ship from, supplier. So we're going to start firstly with the supplier. So again, we need to check that the name and address record is there. And we also, there we go. We also need to be looking here for supplier. So again, going to check the field. So we go name and address, and it's the third field for our name and address type. And then we're going to need a logical AND. So we are now checking that it's a supplier, it's a name and address record, and then this will then feed our filter. And I also need to make sure that I'm taking the right nodes on there. There we go, we've got rows, and then we can start linking this up. And again, I'm going to be doing the same thing here where I'm going to try and clear this up so that it's a little bit more readable. And this is what I mean by the fact that we're going to be needing more space. So we're going to take this and we're just going to move it off further here, just so we've got a little bit more room. And there we go. And then we can start taking the various bits as we go across on here. So we can take our type, our code, our name, address 1, address 2, county, country, and postcode. So we're going to take all of those particular fields now so that we're getting our full address through. And we're going to continue this now and repeat the same piece basically, but change the supplier so that we've got the ship to, the carrier, and the ship from. So all I'm going to do now is copy this, paste it, and we can basically do the same process. So I can grab this same node up here. I can also grab this, same on here. And then this can then be our ship to. And then we can start joining everything else up on here as well. So we can start taking our type, code, name, and so forth. And then once we've completed this, we can then continue this so that we get all our address types so that we're ready for when we need them. So here we've got carrier, ship to, ship from, and supplier. So I'm going to repeat that now and then come back and show you where we are. So we now have our 4 types of name and address records, our supplier, ship to, carrier, and ship from, all set up so that we can now reference these variables whenever we want to reach them instead of trying to go back to the source. So that makes that really straightforward. One last thing, again, this is a lot of setup, but once we've done this, it becomes a lot easier to start mapping. One thing I do want to do is I want to look at references, because we've got references in the data that we get, sort of header level references that we also want to be able to quite easily pick up. So we've got an airway bill reference number here and an invoice reference number. So again, like we have with the other elements here, I'm going to be inserting a variable of XML structure that I've built just using standard XML. So again, creating a very, very simple XML structure. Again, all of these structures are very, very simplistic. So here what we can do now is, again, very similar to what we've done with all of the other ones. We can actually filter here. And then we can reference our ref, and all of our references will now be part of this particular node here. So we can take the code, and the value, which should be 3 and 4. Field 3, field 4. There we go. So we're getting ourselves set up in a position here where we've got everything we need, and then all we need to do is start mapping that across to our X12 format, our 856. Okay, so we can start doing that now. So we've already got the 00 bit done here. What else do we need to map? Well, we need to map the interchange ID qualifier. So we've got to do that. So in that instance, that's going to be a fixed value. So let's just grab this. So that's going to be ZZ. So we've got to set ZZ for the interchange ID qualifier. And also for the interchange ID qualifier further down. So that's both of those. So -1 and -2. Let's get that, sit that there. Perfect. What else do we need to map over? Well, quite simply, we need to map over the interchange sender ID. So that will be the code for the supplier. So we've got supplier here, we've got the code, and we can now map that across to our field here so that we've got that in place. Then what else do we need to map? Well, we've got the receiver one here. Now the receiver one is going to relate to our ship to. So our ship to code, again, we can bring that across. We also have an interchange control number. So we need to potentially look at bringing that across. So that's our interchange here. So we've got our interchange control number. Again, all of this we've mapped, so we're there, and we've sorted now for our ISA record. So now we need to start looking at more of the structure of this X12 document. So I'm going to pull this down, and then we can start looking at our groups and our GS function here. So what we need to do is we need to map our group. So for each group, that's going to be related to a HDR because it's our header. And again, we're only expecting one of those per message because this is going to be a per ASN. And then what we now need to do is start mapping our GS segment here. So here we're really looking at the functional elements with this transaction. That's what it's all about. So in this case, we would fix values around the functional identifier, which in this case is SH. So let's do that now. So we go on here. We can then do SH. And that will be our functional identifier. Then we can have a look at the other fields that we need to set for this particular element. So we've got things like the group control number, which will be 2. We've got the responsible agency, which in our case is going to be X. And then we've got the version identifier there as well. So we've got these here. So we are literally going to be fixing these as fixed values. And obviously the 410 then relates to the version of X12 this particular message is utilizing. So we've now got our GS functional group done. Next, we need to actually look at the message itself. And again, the message, like everything else that's key in here, is just going to relate to, if we expand this out, to our HDR. So our header record. We only want one message. We've got one message we're sending, one ship notice, 1856 message. And again, we need to set things up for the ST, so the transactional set header. So in this case, we want to fix these values, and that's fine. So for us, these are going to be the values relating to the transaction. So it is 856 because that's the transaction we're dealing with. And then we've got a 2, which is our control number basically on this. So we can set that here. Again, fixed values, very straightforward. Hi everyone. I'm always looking to produce more content for this channel. So can I ask you a favour? If you enjoyed the content I produce, could you kindly subscribe? This will help my channel beat the YouTube algorithm and gain more exposure and opportunities to generate further content. Thank you. Next, we need to look at the BSN. Now, the BSN in this case, tells the receiver that it's, shipment ASN 123456 created on X, and it's the original message. So what we now need to do is set those particular values. So we can deal with the fixed value. So those fixed values being the transactional set purpose. So I can pop that in here. So we've got 00 for that. So that's going to be indicating that it's the original message. That's the code that says this is the original. We then need to start mapping over some of the other core fields as well. So in this instance, we'll need to take the shipment identification, which is going to be the ASN ID. We also then need to set the date and time, and this will be related to the message itself. So it's in essence the current date and time. So what I have here, I should have it in as a user function, hopefully. So let me just check. Yeah, there we go. I've got a string that I can, a function that I can set based on providing a date through. So I've got a string here of year, month, day, so a date time, and it's then going to convert that into a date time, so I can set it in here. So if you've not used user-defined functions in MapForce before, it's very straightforward. You can highlight various elements, you can then go function, create user-defined function, and it will basically create a function for you based on that. So if I open this up, you can see here, we're just splitting a string and taking the date time parts from that and outputting a date time. So in this instance, what we want to be able to do is all around the transaction, we want to take the created date. Created date time, so if we go into our CSV here, we've got the created date and time here, and then this is the shipped one. So we're going to use that created date time, and we're going to link that here to date, and then also to time. And the X12 kind of formatting will take care of taking that actual date time value and just taking the time and the date value and assigning those as it needs to. So that has now set up our BSN record. At this point, it's likely that we haven't actually got a valid X12856, but we have mapped predominantly most of the header information. So we can select output and see what this would actually look like. And you can see here, we've got things set up as they should. And at the moment, we're looking here, if I zoom this in, we're looking here at no HL records here. So we want to look at the hierarchy levels and getting those set. And obviously we've got some errors down here related to a lot of that particular data. But at the outset, at least, this particular data looks to be good. And then we can start looking at mapping our different HL levels. So looking at this, I think we look to be okay. We can then start looking at our HL records. So in this case, what we've got to bear in mind is we need to map, if we pull up our example here, we need to map different hierarchy levels in order to create a valid X12 message. In this case, what we need to do is we need to basically create multiple different HL records based on different information that we've got in this CSV. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to create a HL record for, in essence, the ASN itself, so the shipment. We would then, under each shipment, want to create a HL record for an order. So each of the purchase orders. We would then want to create a HL record for each of, let's say, the pallets, and a HL record for each of the cartons that are on the pallet. And then within this particular HL record, we'd have the line information, which has your eaches and things like that. And obviously, if we've got repeated number of cartons and pallets, then we need to have those in the hierarchy as well. Now, these need to be ordered as such that if I create the scenario we've got now, so we've got a pallet with 2 cartons and a pallet with 1 carton. So let's just do this for the time being. So that's our first order. Then we have our second order, which is just 1 pallet and 1 carton. So there we go. So with our HLs, this would need to be 1, this would need to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But what you need to at each HL level, you need to be able to reference the parent. So in this case, the order, its parent will be 1. And that will be the same as this order down here, because they all basically link to the same shipment. But then the pallet here needs to reference 2, because it belongs to this order, and this is the key here. Then for our carton, in this case, that will need to reference 3, and so will this, because these 2 cartons belong to this pallet. And then we've got this particular pallet here. So this pallet is going to... Oh, I've missed on here. No, that's correct. This pallet here will then link to number 2, this order, in the same way as this pallet does. So this pallet is HL3 belonging to HL2, this order. This is HL6 belonging again to the same order. And then this particular carton is going to belong to 6. And then again, so forth. So pallet 9 belongs to HL8 because it's under that order. And then carton 10 belongs to pallet 9. And this is where getting this to work from a flat file can become quite complex. So we're going to look at this in a minute, but at the moment we know this is always going to be static. So we can just fix this particular HL and sort out the various references we need for that. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so now let's start setting up our HL loop. Here we can expand our loop, and then firstly we need to be looking at the HL here. So here we need to set the hierarchical ID number and also the hierarchical level here. So when we were talking about our levels, we have our shipment, orders, and so forth. So here what we have is we're going to set this number, default it to 1. As we've discussed, we're always going to have 1 at this particular level because we're always going to have that high level shipment. And then S describes the shipment. So again, that's going to be our code here. So we've got our hierarchical ID number, and then we've got our level code for that, which is going to say that this is related to a shipment because it's the top level. Now, for this particular loop, we should probably map here the HDR in. So we're going to say for every HDR, we're going to have one loop with the HL on it. So again, we're saying for every header, we're going to create a single shipment. Then what we need to do is we need to look further at what other elements we're going to need. Now, we're going to need lines later, so we can expand that out. And then we're probably going to also then need to look at other elements. But in this case, what we probably want to focus on are our carrier details, because again, we're talking about a shipment at this point. So in this case, for our TD5, we want to show the transport details or the carrier. So for this, we'll need to look at our carrier name and address and then try and pull that through. So for each one of the, well, for the carrier, we can then ping that through to the TD5. So we've got our carrier here. So for this name and address, we're going to go, actually, we want to ping that through to here. And then we can start mapping the various details across for this. We've got the routing sequence that will need to be set on this. We then have, so we've got things like the carrier codes, the transport code, and things like that. So we're going to map those through. So I'm going to bring the fixed values that we need to describe those just on screen. Here we go. Again, we'll try and zoom this in, just to make this a little bit clearer on here. So let's do some of these fixed values. So we first need to do the routing sequence. So that is set to B. So the routing sequence just indicates that it's by carrier. So we know this is a carrier delivery. We then want to map through the next element, which in this case is going to be the identification code qualifier. And then we also then want to map through the transport method code. So let's just make sure we've got those. So again, these are fixed values. So we're saying the transport code or method is by truck, and the 2 just indicates that the carrier code, which will be our identification mark, is just a standard code for us. So what we then need to do is pick that up and map that through. So we've got the standard identification code qualifier, and then we want to map through the actual identification code. And this is going to relate to the code for the carrier. So in this case, that's here. And then we can map that through to here. So we're starting to pull that picture of information through. So we've got that together. Then we also want to set the routing. So the routing in this case is just going to be the name of the carrier. So again, we can pull that through. Just zoom that out. There we go. And then we can map that across on here as well. And if I go to my output, we can start seeing that we're going to get that information come through. We've got 4001, M, and DHL Express. And what I can do is I can then go into our map and go to our CSV. And we can see under carrier 4002, DHL Express. So we know this is working as it should. And we're starting to get that information mapped through as we want. The next element that we need to bring through now is our TD3. So this shows the transport details, things like the airway bill. So what we need to now do is do TD3. We can expand that out and we can start adding the information for that. So for this, we've got some fixed values. I'm going to pop this through. We've got TL. So TL in this case, we map to the equipment description code on here. And in this instance, what we're talking about here is we're talking about the fact it's a trailer. We then need the carrier ID and the airway bill reference. So again, this can be linked up to our references. So we've got our reference field up here, and we want to be able to pull through the airway bill. So I'm going to grab one of these filters, which is quick and easier, and we want to filter on here. We are going to filter on the fact that we've got a reference equal to airway bill. So we're going to bring this down here, equal to airway bill. And then what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to bring this code down here. And we're filtering that where it's going to be the airway bill. And then we're also going to need to take the reference field here and pop this in here. So whenever we've got an airway bill, we're going to create the carrier details. We've then got our equipment description. We then need the equipment initial. So in this case, this is going to be our carrier code. And then I believe we need the equipment number, and that then is going to relate distinctly to our reference number for our airway bill. So again, we need to go up to our value for here, and we can map that through to our equipment number. So that's our TD3. So that's now mapped through, and we've now got the details around the carrier details related to that. Now, again, we can just going to hit save as we go. We can then go output, and we can start seeing that information. So TD3, we've got the carrier code, which we knew we had. We know we've got a trailer here, and then we've got the airway bill reference number. So again, everything is mapping up quite well here. Now, though the map actually runs here, we've got a problem with missing fields. So I think in going through this, I've actually missed some of the key elements here. So on our GS record, I've missed the application sender code, and it would also appear the receiver code as well. So I'm going to map those through. So the sender's code is the code related to the supplier. So we can take this particular code here and we can map this through to the sender's code. And then our receiver's code is going to be our ship to. And again, key fields here are identified by yellow arrows. If I zoom this in, probably be a bit easier to see. So we can take our ship to code now and then map that through. So if we go to output, there we go. So we've got the map working. There's not much information here because we've not really mapped too much further on the HL for the shipment, but we've got no errors. So now we've done that, we can then go down and we can start having a look at the next element, which is our loop N1. So this, again, allows for multiple name and address records. So you've got the name codes, you've got the address details, and then we've also got the city, etc. on here. So let's start having a look at what we need to do in order to map that information. Now, when we're talking about our N1s here, we're talking about our name and address records. Again, it will be related to the details we've got for the supplier, ship to, carrier, and ship from, and what's required for those. So in this case, for the N1, we want to map the supplier, the ship to, and the ship from. So our first one, we're going to map the supplier. So we're going to take that name and address record, and we're going to map that directly to this loop here. And then we can start mapping through the details related to that particular supplier address. So in this case, we've mapped the loop 1. We also then probably should map the name because that, again, needs to be mapped. And then we've got the identity identifier code, the entity identifier code. So what we need to then do is look to map that through. In this case, for a supplier, it's SU, and then the sort of coding for that is a 92. So this says it's a supplier, and 92 will then indicate that it is our code for the supplier here. So this is the identification code qualifier. So we've now got that. And then we can start mapping things through. For instance, in this case, like the name and the actual code for this particular supplier. So I'm going to zoom out just to save scrolling too far. We want to grab the name. So we're going to grab that and pull this down. So again, the name will go here. And then we also need the identification code. Again, this is going to be the code for the supplier. So we can pull this down and we can map that in. So we've got the identification code. We then need to start looking at the other elements of the address. So for us, and in this example, we're going to look at the address information, which is the N3. So here, we're then going to look at the city, state, etc. So what I'm going to do, just to save a little bit of messing about, I'm going to drag this down here to pull it closer, and then I can basically throw it back up. And that will make it easier for us to start mapping this through. So address information, we're going to map address line 1. I'm not going to bother about address line 2. We could look at potentially doing that. We then got city, so we're going to map that here to county. We've then got country, so we've got our country code, and then we've got our postal code here. So again, we've got that information mapped through, and then if I go to output, we can see here we've got our N1, 3, and 4 details, giving us the Dulux supplier that we've got under our CSV here. So if we go here, we've got supplier, and here we can see we've got Dulux, and it should be code 10001. So we go through here, we've got code 10001. So we know that's working. Now, basically, what we need to be able to do is repeat this for the other addresses. So I'm going to throw this back up for our supplier. And then we need to look at mapping our next one. So we had our supplier. So now what we're going to look at is doing our ship to. So the same way I just did a minute ago, I'm actually going to drag this down. Because again, it just makes it easier for us to do this on screen where it's very visible and easy to see. So we're going to say we want to drag this for every ship to. We want to create a loop N. So if we do this, we then go duplicate input, and we then get our other name and address record. And again, we're going to have to follow this same procedure for our other addresses, and later when we extend this particular mapping for our different HLs. So again, we're going to map that on here to this. We then need to get the code for our ship to. Now, ship to in this case is ST. And again, because we are using our own sort of codes here, it's assigned by the sender. We are having that as 92. So our ship to bit here, the identifier code qualifier is here. And then we can go, this is the name. This is the code. And then we're going to go through the same process. Address 1 is going to go to here. And then we're going to do county for our state and city. Let me just zoom this in just so that it's a little bit easier for people who don't have a 4K screen. We then got country code, and then we've got postal code. So again, we can go back to our output. Every time we do this, it's going to update and refresh. We've got Dulux here. We've now got B&Q, which is our ship to. So what I want to do is drag this back up to the top. And again, we can see this map's already starting to get quite busy. But that's fine. We know what we're doing as we're pulling this together. So again, our ship to is B&Q Cambridge. So that is correct. So we've got that working well here. So we've done 2 addresses so far, our supplier and our ship to. We then want to do our ship from. So in order to do that, I'm going to grab the ship from and drag this again down here, and then we can start doing what we need to with this. And again, we need to duplicate. Doesn't matter what one we put it on, it will just always go the one at the bottom. So duplicate input, and then we can start mapping this through. So we need to expand this out. We want to expand N1, N3, and N4. Double click on here. Just get MapForce doing the work for us. So there we go. So in this case, we want the code is going to be here. The name is going to be here. And then we need to find what the code is for the ship from. So I know when it comes to X12 that the ship from will be SF. And again, it is assigned by the sender. So now we just need to do the rest of the address. So again, we're repeating the same sort of process here. We've then got the county, country, and postcode. We can then go to the output, and now we've got that. So we've got the B&Q, we've got the Dulux, and we've now got our warehouse as the ship from address. So we've now managed to build up our X12 data. We've managed to set a header. We've gone through that header hierarchy, the HL, and we've managed to generate that HL, and we've got a completely valid mapping. So this now is our ASN. It's got all the information we need about the ASN, except for the pallets, the pre-advices, so our orders, which is the old record, and then the containers, which have our pallets and cartons and line references on it. So we are now ready to start having a look at that. That particular, how we're going to start looking at creating multiple HLs, that's going to get quite complicated. So what I want to do is I'm going to stop this session here, and then next week I'll be releasing the part 2 for this, where we'll dive deeper into this particular mapping. We'll carry it on, and then we'll implement it so that when we start running it, we have all the correct HL records that we require, not just the shipment level, but the order and the pallets and the items as well. Thank you for joining me during this session. Do subscribe, as I'll be pulling out another video very soon where we'll go over how you map from a flat file to the various different HL records within X12. This can be quite complex, but you can achieve this with MapForce, and I'll be showing you how you can do that. Thank you.